Hello and welcome to Inside the Birds TV. Geoff Mosher, Adam Caplan, and of course, our special guest today is Andrew Brandt. Now, he's a former Green Bay Packers president, former Eagles advisor to Howie Roseman. He's also the executive director at the Morad Center for the Study of Sports Law at Villanova, a columnist for the Monday Morning Quarterback, and he's got a podcast, a great podcast everybody should check out called The Business of Sport, and that's available on all podcast platforms. Andrew, did I get everything out? I mean, you are a man who wears many hats.
Yeah, I mean, as I told you before, I let people sort of pick and choose their IDs. I guess the only thing to add is I'm kind of an agent now, but not really. Gary Vaynerchuk, a lot of people know who Gary V is, and he's brought me in to kind of be their advisor consultant as they start a sports agency. So not really in the agency business, but I can call myself a certified agent. I took the test and everything, helping them get their sports practice going.
Well, there you go. And that's perfect for what we're going to talk about today. First of all, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
We thought it would be a perfect time, given the intersection here of sports and business and the pandemic and the uncertainty of the 2020 NFL season. So we can ask you a lot of questions and kind of tap into your expertise. Before we get into a few things, I want to let everybody know that ITB TV is powered by DraftKings, the #1 rated sportsbook app. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook and Casino app right now and start playing casino games online. And when you do, make sure you use the promo code ITB to get your bonuses. So your name, Andrew, came up recently in a podcast that Adam and I were doing. We're talking about the downtime that every year there is between the end of minicamp and the beginning of training camp, and how coaches get very nervous that they don't have their players under their, the whole team gets nervous. So they're all out for a few weeks, and how that must have been, exacerbated this year multiple times because the players never came. And so we were talking about that because of the Dallas Goedert incident where he gets sucker punched at a bar. And of course, one of your famous stories about one of your players, Najee Davenport, came up with, one of those things that happens in the off season.
Yeah.
And how much do you use that as like when you talk to either athletes or other executives? Does that story come up a lot for you?
Yeah, that story a little bit. I think the general premise, what you just talked about, Geoff, is the cringing in the off season when you get the calls from the unidentified number. And that day was a special day. I believe I can even recall like July 7th, 2005, where I got the call from the unrecognized Miami area code, and I was actually playing golf, and he said what Najee had done, and I was on like the 7th hole. Someone on the 10th hole said they heard me say the following 3 words: "He did what?" And God bless this detective who called me and said it in the most matter-of-fact way. I've gotten your number from Mr. Davenport. He's being held here. And I'm like, okay, well, what'd he do? Well, we have him defecating in a woman's laundry hamper. And he just said it in the most matter-of-fact way. And that's when I said, he did what? But listen, beyond that amusing story, what really got to me the other day is everyone saw this sort of video about Lamar Jackson on the beach and playing. And I got this weird call one day because Lamar ended up falling in right next door, even hit a jet ski. I got a call one year, a guy from Jersey had transferred to me, says, I'm in Jersey, I'm so-and-so, and I was just at Cancun, and your guy fell off a jet ski, and he was in the hospital last I saw. And I'm like, what? Who are you? What? A guy from Jersey? So the first thing you do, every executive, Howie Roseman, me, everyone, the first call you make is to the agent. Like, what's going on? And the agent's like, hold on, I'll call. And he calls, and he finds out this player did have a jet ski accident, was bleeding from the head, and was in the Cancun hospital, but was fine. So these are the kind of things you find out. The one thing, Geoff, is that I think it's almost easier this year because we're in the middle of a pandemic. There's not as much nightlife. There's not as much kind of feeling like these guys have to get their last licks in Vegas or partying in that July month, in that late June, July month where things can go crazy outside because they're worried about getting into the bunker in the end of July, and then they don't go out for a long time. So in that way, maybe it's a little different.
Andrew, the NFL seems to be very bullish on having a season. Based on the protocols they have in place, they feel very confident about it. But what if there is no season? What happens with their contracts? Are they told to the next season? What would happen?
Yeah, it's a big question that a lot of people are asking, and I wish I had a definitive answer. The way I read contracts specifically, before we get to the macro CBA, the internal micro of a contract says player shall receive his pay, paragraph 5, which is their salary, commencing, that's the word, with the first game of the season through the season. Now, if there's no commencing, there's no pay. You know, I'm a lawyer. The way I read that is if you don't commence the first game, you don't get paid. The other part of it is I don't know how that would affect bonuses. My sense is you got bonuses, you keep them. But obviously there are a lot of per game roster bonuses out the window. There are bonuses based on performance out the window. It gets even trickier, Adam, if you talk about half season. And our players, if I'm a player, I'm going to say I had an 8-sack bonus. We stopped the season after 5 games. I had 6 sacks. Of course I was going to get 8 sacks. But the team could say, well, you could have gotten hurt the next play. You know, all this thing could go into. So my sense is they do not have a good case, and contracts would toll, meaning they would stop. And then if you had 2 years left and we start in 2021, you still have 2 years left. You don't have 1 year left. That's my sense.
So in the case of a franchise tag, like Dak Prescott just signed his, that's all base salary, correct? It's a big number, but it's not bonus whatsoever. So if there were hypothetically no season, then players like Dak hypothetically would see, if nothing is worked out, then no money based on the legal.
That's the way I read it. And he would be tagged again next year. It would be his first tag. Now, again, he signed something. I am assuming it's like you said, all 25 or whatever million in salary, but maybe he worked out something, because I think a lot of us were scratching our head, why did he sign? Maybe he got 5 million bonus. Maybe he got 10 million bonus of it. So we don't know exactly.
Andrew, when it comes down to fans, you know, if the fans are not there at the games, how are they going to make up that money? There's been a debate. Do you take it from a future cap to make up for that money? How do you make up that money if you're not getting that revenue from games?
Let's talk about how much revenue. Baseball just went through this horrendous negotiation because they were losing 40%. 40% of their revenues tied up in game day. And of course, now they're going 50 games, 60. Now football, my best estimate is 20%. So 20% of revenues are tied up in game day versus baseball with 40%, because of course, NFL media revenues dwarf the ticket revenues. So on a general sense, if you're talking 15 billion, 20% is 3 billion. And just say they lose $3 billion. And now it's something where I think we have to see what happened in baseball go to football again, where owners come to players and say, you're going to feel our pain. They don't say it that way, but you're going to share our pain, and you can share it all in 2021, or let's do something to smooth up the cap. No union leader wants to be the guy that has a cap go down from 1 year to the next. That never happens. So maybe they'd be receptive. So 200 million becomes, thrown out a number, 175, and 2021, instead of going to 170, now becomes 180. I don't know. These are all, or 185 or 190. So these are all kinds of things that I think you have to think about, because there's going to be pain, and the revenues are going to be felt in the 2021 cap, which I think will be addressed earlier.
You said two things there that really made me, maybe I hadn't even realized. First, you said that NFL media revenue eclipses gate receipt revenue. Is that correct?
By a wide margin.
Wow. So you're talking about the network, the website. What involves it? That generates more money through advertising, I guess, than
I'm talking
than
about
they
the
get from
media.
tickets?
I'm talking about Fox, CBS, ESPN.
Oh,
Oh,
TV,
so
TV,
television
TV.
contracts too.
I'm
Okay,
talking about,
okay,
you
okay.
know, when I got in the league in 1999, I would guess, just basic, because Packers, we were public,
Mhm.
maybe 40% of our revenues was tied up in game day, and maybe 40% of revenues were national media. Now that has switched because national media contracts have grown so much where if you're looking at the check that teams get now from the league, is about 270 million per team, right? Per team with a $200 million cap. So you should be able to handle your player payroll pretty well. But again, national media is probably 60% of team revenues now. And then, of course, the local game day is probably 20%.
How amicable do you think these talks could and would be if it came down to not just either a shortened season or a canceled season or a fanless in the stands type seating? I mean, I'm sure they've already kind of put their toes in the water a little bit, but do you think that this will be as bad as baseball?
Not as bad as baseball, but it's so interesting, Geoff, because this pandemic hit on the day they signed an 11-year agreement. It's just amazing, the timing. And listen, I was admittedly very against that agreement for the players' side. I was very vocal. I thought they didn't get enough for the 17th game as one snapshot of it. But, you know, we've got new leadership with J.C. Treader. It seems like the union and the league are getting along well. They did an early deal. They did a year before they needed to. So maybe it'll be amicable. I think compared to baseball, it will definitely be amicable.
Andrew, when we get to the preseason, we know that the NFL and the NFLPA are talking about shortening it from 4 to 2. You were a guy who was also an agent. A lot of people don't know this. You were actually Matt Hasselbeck's first agent?
Yes.
Okay. You've been on the club side. So you've kind of seen what the preseason is. How much of a big deal is it if you go from 4 to 2? How much does that really matter at this point?
Well, I think, you know, coaches and personnel people would be upset about it because of evaluation. I sense it's kind of something that you don't want to hear if you're a coach or personnel. You want to hear someone in media say, but, you know, teams are pretty much set going in except for 2, 3, 4, 5 roster spots. And I think that's going to be very tough on players, you know, that these teams are set now and whoever was the higher pick maybe, or, you know, it's going to be tough to make that. But I think the bigger question, Adam, is will they cut these games? And I think they will, depending on where we are with this pandemic. I just think they're going to, as I call it, nibble around the edges as much as they can to preserve the sanctity of the season. Cut out training camp? Sure. Cut out preseason if we have to. Just don't get to September 9th. Just don't mess with that. And of course, as you know so well, Jeff Pash, Roger Goodell, full speed ahead. It's been everything this offseason, except for a Zoom offseason with the players. It really hasn't been any disruption at all. And they're going to keep trying to do that. And yes, there'll be sacrifices if there's half preseason or no preseason, but that's better than giving up games, real games.
Do you think training camp, if it starts and is able to proceed as normal, will have to be a lot different for coaches because they didn't have the OTAs? You know, with the Eagles, what they do is they have a couple of days that are soft, and then they get right into the pads about day 4, day 5, and then every practice is like a preparation for the season. But with all the newcomers and the rookies, free agents and things, how do you sandwich all of that into the same amount of time?
Yeah, it's a challenge. But if you remember the CBA, it seems like ages ago, but when it was done in March, I mean, one factor was even more reduced offseason and a 5-day, I believe, acclimation period, so that, like you said, they're not ramping up into heavy practice like once they get there. Mm-hmm. And I like that because my experience at the Packers is day 2, 3, 4, 5 of training camp, hamstrings, calves, all of it, you know, soft tissue injuries out the wazoo. So that could help that. So they're doing that anyway. Now, if we're talking about a training camp of 10 days, I don't know how they're going to do that.
Andrew, one thing from talking to a lot of agents in the last couple of weeks is that teams simply are not even, they're not willing to get a lot of rookie deals done because the team doctor is not examining the player so the player can pass the physical. How big are these physicals? Because they don't seem to trust the neutral doctor. That's the thing that I'm getting from the agents. You're on the club side. So how big is it to have your own doctor look at these players before they sign?
Well, if you're a club exec, it's much bigger to you than people on the outside would think. And this phrase sounds weird, but you just want to get your hands on them. You want to be the one that's really doing it, because I don't know if it's not a trust thing with other doctors, but you mentioned the union and agents. There's just this inherent distrust, really, on the medical side. And it always bothered me because one of my best friends still to this day is Dr. Pat McKenzie. And he's with the Packers doctor forever. And he's just, to me, always been on the player side, always suggesting more time than less when I was trying to do injury settlements. He's always been on the player side. So I always get frustrated with this attitude that, hey, he's the team doc. Now, maybe there are team docs out there like that, that you can't trust. But there's a definite feeling from the player side is we want our own doc. So now when money's on the line, teams are saying, no, come here. And I mentioned I work with Vayner. We have a couple guys that can't get their bonus because the team wants them there and they're hesitant to get on a plane. One guy's got an infant, just born baby, and he's not going to get on a plane yet. And I'm saying that's fine, but you got to get there, do your physical there to get the bonus. So, yeah, that's going on.
Yeah, I'm assuming, like, you look at the 2017 draft class, Andrew, and boy, there are a lot of really good players from that class. We're talking about Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
We're talking about Patrick Mahomes. Jamal Adams has been very vocal. He's from that class, not getting his money. But it doesn't seem like, I think Eddie Jackson maybe and somebody else. Only two guys from that class who have made a Pro Bowl have gotten an extension. So I have to think that that's tied into the owners right now not wanting to get, or the teams right now not really wanting to give up front money until they know that there's going to be a season.
Yeah, I mean, this is the big issue right now is how do you do a contract? I just talked about we don't know the cap in 2021. We don't know the cap in 2020. Maybe I'm out here on an island, but I don't think it's going to stay 200 million. I don't. So, and then people say, well, how do you deal with that? Well, the same way they deal with it every year. They cut veterans, making a lot of money. So you're right. Nothing's getting done. People ask me about Jamal Adams, about Pat Mahomes, about Deshaun Watson, about Dak Prescott. I'm like, no, no, none of it. And Jamal Adams has issues with leverage, and Jets have 2 years left. That's a whole different thing. But even if Jamal Adams had 1 year left, no, I'm a team exec background. I'm not doing deals right now. And you're right. I think it's just Jackson, McCaffrey, and Buckner with the trade to Indy got a big deal. That's really it. That's it. That's your whole offseason.
Andrew, one thing that I want to talk to you about contracts is this. Geoff and I on our show, Inside the Birds, we had talked about their contract structures have changed a little bit in recent years. They're doing a lot of renegotiation. When Joe Banner was there, they wouldn't do those. They were not big on
the cap renegotiation.
Right, correct. So what we're noticing as we look at contracts is there are a lot of dummy years where they restructure with signing bonus proration, and the contract really is only 2 years, but with proration it extends to 5 years. As a guy used to be a negotiator for the Packers. Were you against doing contracts like that? How do you feel about these so-called dummy years?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like Joe, and I learned from Joe. I'm not really against that. I always call it, the teams that get ahead of the curve, where they get a ton of cap room, and then they can load it up. The ideal to me is matching cash and cap. So you got a guy making $20 million. The best thing you can do, to my end, is have a $20 million cap number instead of having a $5 million cap number, because you're bonusing it out and pushing out proration. And then what if things don't work out? It's all about protecting risk if things don't work out. Sure, if Carson Wentz, Fletcher Cox, all these guys play to the end of their deal, it's never a problem. But if they don't, it's a problem. And that's why I always, I guess I'm most proud in Green Bay that after 17 years, which 11 of them I managed. Brett Favre. He's left the Packers with like $500,000 of dead money. And now you have players leaving teams with 15, 20, Antonio Brown, 21 million, Tom Brady, 14 million. That's what gets teams in trouble. So let's just clear this myth up. Mm-hmm. Paying quarterbacks 30 million doesn't get teams in trouble. Okay. That's what you pay on a $200 million cap. You should be able to pay your star quarterback $30 million. What gets teams in trouble is excess proration for guys that aren't there. They're not even there. And, you look at the Steelers last year playing with an uphill deck because they're counting 20 million for Antonio Brown. The Giants are counting 16 million for Odell Beckham. So they're not playing with a full deck, and they both had bad years. So to me, that's the issue.
Well, you look at the Eagles, Andrew, they've been very, Howie Roseman has been very vocal about what the salary cap situation looks like for the Eagles, not this year because they're under, but the year after and the year after. They have a lot of exorbitant salaries and some of those contracts with dummy years. If the cap were to go down, which we've talked about, that would make it his job even harder than it already is to be compliant next year. And I think that would have to lead to some really difficult personnel decisions, some players who might be good that just may have to go for whatever reasons.
Well, it leads to the kind of thing I just poo-pooed, which is cap renegotiations just to squeeze out some money.
Right.
But, then there's the more deleterious part of that, and is cutting players with high numbers. Listen, the league has, I don't have the analytics, but the league is getting younger. And I'm guessing 50 to 60% of rosters, maybe 60 to 70% are on rookie contracts. And what that means is you have 30% of your roster on veteran contracts. You should be able to manage that. If each guy on a rookie contract is making $1 million, which is high, maybe that's 30, 40, $50 million. And then you have $150 million. You should be able to pay your guys. So I think cap management, gets away. But let's just give kudos to other people out there. For example, Jimmy Garoppolo's deal in San Francisco, paid him like $40 million last year and had a $37 million cap. That's great. They could contain it. And if Garoppolo doesn't work out in a couple of years, good. They don't have any hole. So that's really the goal.
Andrew, so before we get out of here, tell us about your podcast, The Business of Sports.
Yeah, what I wanted to do, Adam, was really create a situation where I can use my expertise and bring on people that I respect and like, and they can be team executives, agents, people in the news, executives in sports associations. I had a woman that wrote a book on immersing herself in the World Poker Series, Maria Konnikova, on this week. I have my own rants that I do a lot. So it's kind of I think, a unique and differentiated podcast going inside the inner workings of the business of sports. Obviously, my expertise with football, but I go into a lot of different sports as well. I had Alejandro Bedoya of the Union on, talk about the MLS agreement as he heads into the bubble this week. So really inside the business of sports.
It's a great podcast, Andrew. I recommend everybody check it out. The Business of Sports podcast with Andrew Brandt. Before we let you go, I have one last question, and it's not a fair question. I'm going to tell you that right now. I'm putting you on the spot, but I feel like your finger is more on the pulse than anybody else's. So if you look into your crystal ball, what do you see for 2020 NFL football?
I mean, I will talk a minute about what I wrote about in Sports Illustrated this week, which is that if we believe the priority for the NFL and all leagues is health and safety of the players, let's be real. We wouldn't play. We would not play football.
Right.
But I know more than anyone in media knows it's a business. And the business, a $15 billion business, they're not shutting it down. They're just not going to. They're going to play through at every possibility. So does that mean I'm saying they're going to play? I guess it does. I worry. And here's what I worry about. I worry about multiple infections. It's one thing to sort of wipe out a player. It's another thing to wipe out a position group and then wipe out 15 players on a roster, because now you're really talking about a competitive balance issue. And the NFL lives for competitive balance. And what would they do if they get in that situation? Would they postpone the game? Or would they just let it play out where teams, can't compete? I wonder about that. And then I really wonder, I listened to a conference call with Dr. Tom Mayer, the NFLPA doc. And he said, people have this image of these young, healthy athletes with their armor. It's not true. We got 3 groups that have shown to not do well with the virus: African Americans, high BMI measurements, and those with sleep apnea. Now, I don't know how many of those comorbidities the NFL players have, obviously beyond the African American, but that scared me. And the other thing that scared me, I don't know if you guys read this article about Von Miller. It was one where I just sort of stopped and my tracks, where he said, of course, everyone knows he had the virus. He said 3-4 weeks following recovery, he's still having breathing issues, like windedness issues and working out and lung capacity. And I'm like, Von freaking Miller? Oh my God. So, we could see, pick a name, your star running back, get sick in October and he'll be back for the stretch run. Well, maybe he won't at any kind of level that he was before. And those are the scary parts of this. So what I'm saying, your question's a tough one. I'm saying, yes, they're going to play through, but I'm not sure they finish. I'm not sure any of these leagues finish. I'm not sure NBA, NHL, MLS, baseball. I'm not sure. I know they're starting, but I'm not sure anyone's finished. And here's the last thing. If one of them doesn't finish in August, says we can't do it, does the NFL really start in that atmosphere? Mm-hmm. Like you got baseball shutting down, NFL because of the virus, and then you got NFL starting? So those are questions I have.
Prescient words, prescient questions, Andrew. We both really appreciate you coming on with us. And I think, down the road, if some of this stuff that we're talking about comes to fruition, we'll have to have you back on to talk about it even more if you're willing to.
Of course. Always good to be with my guys. And I'm here in Philly, even though I got my Eagles hat.
There you go. All right, that's Andrew Brandt, former Green Bay Packers president, former Eagles advisor to Howie Roseman. He's also the executive director at the Morad Center for the Study of Sports Law at Villanova, a columnist for the Monday Morning Quarterback, and he's got a podcast that you must listen to called the Business of Sport Podcast. It's available on all platforms. That's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Birds TV. Thanks to Hunter Brody, our producer. You can find his work on YouTube, Sports Talk with Broads. Catch the latest Inside the Birds podcast on any podcast platform, and check out Adam's NFL Notebook just posted on InsideTheBirds.com. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you all on the next episode of ITB TV.